So just to give you a little bit of background about Innovation Works, we take Southwestern PA's tech companies to the next stage of growth and success with critical seed money, expertise, and a substantial network of connections to customers, mentors, future investors, and others who can help startup companies grow and succeed. We are one of the country's most active seed investors, and we are the only one dedicated solely to the southwestern Pennsylvania region. You might also have heard of some of our accelerators, Alpha Lab Gear, and Alpha Lab Health. We align with the next stage mission to create a continuous flow of funding, expertise, and networks that entrepreneurs need to grow. So today we just want to talk about support services that founders often overlook. And mistakes in these fields can sometimes actually break your business. Speaking of founders, our moderator today is no stranger to navigating these topics. Andy Chan was the CEO and co-founder of IW portfolio company Vigilant Technologies that was actually acquired by Sword Health in 2021, so congratulations on that. And he's also the partner and co-founder of Moss Generation, which is a founders for founders exclusive networking group. So any founders here, I encourage you to talk to Andy about Moss Generation after this conversation. And I'm going to let you take it away from here. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks for the wonderful intro, Jane. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I guess we'll just start off just having all the panels introduce themselves a little bit. So, yeah, we can start off with you, Carissa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carissa Habsburg. I am a tax director at Sisterson. I've been working with high-growth companies my entire career, which is about 12 years now. A lot of the things that we do is help you guys figure out what you don't know that you don't know, and make sure that you plan for the future. Because doing things right the first time really does make a difference, especially early on. So yeah, I'm on the tax side too, by the way, because you guys don't need audits early on or reviews, so go team tax.
I'm Laurie Kuzneski from Kuzneski Insurance Group. We do insurance, employee benefits, commercial insurance, and HR services for startups and growing companies, and I'm also an angel investor. So my husband and I together have invested in, I can't even tell you how many companies, but I did just finally get my SOFA, which we always joke that my SOFA money goes to invest in startups. So I just bought one myself this weekend. But so we see a lot of things in startups when we invest in them and do our due diligence, but then also when we work with them on the insurance side. And so we're able to advise our startup companies in more than just, you know, hey, you need to have these things in place or this compliance in place. So it's a nice mix of experience to share.
Hi, my name is Derrick Maultsby. I work at Frost Brown Todd, a law firm here in Pittsburgh. And, we have offices nationally. We actually just opened our offices in Los Angeles, San Francisco, in Orange County, so we're pretty excited about that. I am a tech attorney and privacy attorney, work mostly with anywhere from startups to more enterprise technology companies, so I've gotten kind of a wide range of experience through a lot of these issues, and I'm excited to kind of talk about some of the things we see startups do that they shouldn't.
So we should expect an invite to sunny California soon?
I mean,
Thanks for that.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I have the LA hat on today.
Ah, there you go. You got to run the brand.
I made a Biggie Smalls reference in our we all got a press release, and we put out the announcement, and I was like, you know, a wise man once said, I'm going back to Cali, and marketing didn't like that. They didn't think it was good.
But you got to inject the fun in, because I know everyone's waking up early. They're like, oh my god, like tax, insurance, like it's so fun, right?
I just want to throw Biggie Smalls lyrics out there.
I love it. So I think starting off, like, because we're in COVID, it's been a crazy time of like remote work and then now going hybrid too. I think a lot of the startups are starting to reconsider just kind of what work is and like kind of how you source talent and how you hire. So I'm kind of curious, maybe kicking to you, Carissa, first, of just like, you know, when you do kind of foreign contractors or kind of employees, like what are some of the things you think through as you're a small company building your team and maybe not all locally?
Well, in the Pittsburgh area, we have a lot of the university scenes, so it's very common. We have people working remotely, traveling, commuters, people working overseas. A lot of times, you have to make the decision between whether or not you have an employee or an independent contractor. More often than not, a startup prefers to have an independent contractor because it costs less for that entity. The catch is the Department of Labor may or may not like that. So identifying whether or not you are controlling that employee or independent contractor is the pivotal question. Google what the definition of control is. There's a lot of criteria out there for it. My point is, though, is that person who is working remotely might still be your employee. But if they're not your employee, they're going to get a Form 1099. And that 1099 would be due in January. The interesting thing is a lot of our clients have foreign contractors, people who work overseas. If they're paid through a service like Upwork or TopTal, they tend to handle the reporting requirements. But what if you're paying them directly? The interesting thing that you might want to pay attention to is getting something called a Form W-8-BEN from a foreign contractor. Basically what that does is it tells you that you have no 1099 requirement for that foreign person or withholding requirement. So as a foreign contractor, consider making sure that you're paying attention to those foreign contractors. If they're domestic, you get something different, a W-9, so that you know what to issue, their name, address, social security number, because I guarantee you, if you tell them to give you that before you pay them, they'll give it to you because they want their money, all right? So that's one piece of advice from a contractor perspective.
From an insurance perspective and an HR perspective, you want to make sure, like Carissa said, that if they're a 1099 or an employee, if you are headquartered in Pennsylvania, you need to have workers' comp insurance. The state requires you to have that. If what we saw during COVID was a whole bunch of people went home and worked from home, and their homes may have been in Florida or Wisconsin, and all of a sudden the workers' comp didn't cover them because they were in a different state. So when that happens, we had to collect all of their home addresses, figure out where everybody was, and make sure they were covered in those different places. So there are those issues. Sometimes from a payroll perspective, working with different payroll companies, there are ones out there that you can do it yourself and all of that. But you have to be careful depending on where those people live. They have different municipality taxes. Pittsburgh is famous for...
Oh yes, lovely.
Yes.
Soul crushing.
Yes, absolutely. So we had, we're headquartered in Indiana, PA, and one of our employees moved to Pittsburgh. And I'm like, oh my God, all the stuff we had to do so they could move to Pittsburgh and we could pay them. So there's a lot of different things that you need to look at. And then from an employee benefits perspective, if somebody, you're offering benefits, sometimes you have to have a certain number of employees within the state and typically more than that are out of state. And then you want to make sure that their benefits cover them in the states that they're in. So there's a lot to consider when you're looking at hiring from outside of Pennsylvania.
Right, makes sense. And now, is workers' comp, it's over 10 employees? Is that still the rule?
It is. So if you're a founder, you can opt out. Sometimes, depending on who your clients are, they might require it. But it's from as soon as you have payroll, you have to have workers' comp. And if you have 1099 employees, and this is, sometimes they get, it's the 1099 thing is crazy. So if somebody is truly an independent contractor, they should have their own workers' comp. But if they don't, you're supposed to have them on your workers' comp policy. So it's, one of those things where they'll say, oh, I don't need that, I'm good, I'm just a 1099 employee, but you really should have them on your policy if they don't have their own.
It's funny you say that because when we first started the company, this is 2015, we were in Alpha Lab year, we had zero insurance, also I knew nothing about insurance, and we were so excited because we got our first pilot from Giant Eagle, and then we just got the kind of like money squared away part. We're like, yeah, we're gonna make money, and then they sent us this laundry list of all the insurance requirements, and we're like, what is this? Like,
they give you that money to pay for the insurance.
No, exactly. I legitimately did not consider that. I was like, oh my God, we're rich. They gave us like $30 per user per month, and then to your point, then the insurance bill comes in, we're like, that money just went to the insurance bill.
Well, and sometimes, you know, sometimes they'll have very high limits that they require, and we see it even when people are spinning technology out of the universities. They have very high requirements. And some of those requirements haven't changed since software came to be a thing. So they want product liability insurance, you know, for $5 million, and you know, you're making an app. It's not something that's going into a person's body. So do you really need that much coverage? And so we push back a lot on those things because sometimes the insurance can crush a startup where you can't afford to run the company because you're paying for insurance. So we always try to help our, you know, the startups figure out that right piece and to stage it when you actually need the insurance.
So with a lot of things in your world, in the startup world, it's making business decisions. When you choose to or not to pay for something, what is the business risk on the other end? And those decisions are constant in what you do. So you might find that not paying for as much as you need is what you can afford. The catch will be, what is the risk on the other end?
We always say, can you sleep at night
Yeah,
if you don't
sure.
do this? So.
And definitely the next time I look at pilots, like definitely be thoughtful of like how much the back end operations cost, including insurance, and then really building that into the cost structure of the pilot itself. Because to your point, we were called tech, maybe not, but like as you think about the IP side of it, like Derrick, do you have any sort of kind of recommendations or pitfalls as people start scaling their business? Like even when you start acquiring the first pilot, I know a conversation we had where they're like, you know, do you really want to file just the initial like patent to protect it even before you go commercial? Or, you know, obviously like you may want to go commercial first and then
Yeah, I'll give you an answer that one of my law professors gave me on like the first day. It depends, right? You know, I think it really depends on your business, depends on what your IP is, right? Because obviously filing is a risk, right? There's a risk associated with filing because you are putting out there very publicly what your technology is, what it does, et cetera, and so forth, right? And I'm not a patent attorney, so you know, I do leave patent talk to the patents folks that we have in our offices, and they're great, and they talk in a language I don't understand. But from a general IP standpoint, I think a lot of the risk I see comes from early stage companies and the people, right? Whether it be founders, whether it be you know, sort of those early, not necessarily employees, but usually independent contractors, or advisors, right? Which I do this because I really sometimes don't understand what an advisor is, or why they're there. And you know, they're usually, you know, those are early things that you want to see. And if anybody, you know this, has gone through any diligence period with an investor, they want to see very clear documentation for everybody that's involved with the company that protects the intellectual property of the company, right? And so typically early on, there's not a lot of that documentation because documenting those relationships does come with a cost. And so it's trying to find a more affordable way to document those relationships through, you know, templated documents that have very clear IP protection clauses as well as, you know, other confidentiality provisions and so on and so forth. And so I think, you know, just early on, people are just very excited. They trust everybody because it is an awesome community and the ecosystem's great. But at the end of the day, like when the sun is shining and everything's good, get it in writing that that person won't steal everything or take your idea down the street, right? Because ultimately, if you don't get that documented, and then when an investor does want to invest in you, and you know, you go to the person, and you go, hey, can you sign this? There's nothing legally making them have to sign that piece of paper, right? So that could already sink you, and I've kind of seen people get to the finish line you know, of an investment, they worked so hard pitching and doing all those things, and then in the diligence period, they just didn't have everything documented appropriately. Usually that's when people come to me, like, how can you help me with this, and da-da-da-da, like, I need this done yesterday, and sometimes it's just too late.
Classic. I like it, yeah. No, it's funny, I actually was doing some mentoring right now with some startups, and to your point with the trust, and you're like, oh, they're just so happy to have some sort of help. and then they're like, let's talk about the business, technology, blah blah. And then I'm like hassling them. I'm like, you need to send me the NDA now. You need to send me the proprietary rights agreement. Like, I'm still going to help you. And to your point, like, I'm actually harassing them to be like, just send it to me. We can backdate it. So to your point, when you raise money, you can formally say that you did it. You covered your butt. So I guess you mentioned it a bit, but like, what are the downfalls though if you don't have it? Like, kind of how have you seen it implode on itself?
Yeah, I mean, two ways. Both recently, obviously, we talked about the investment piece. Diligence, at the pre-seed, seed, more institutional investor rounds, it just gets more heightened. But at every stage, the bare minimums, they want to see the IP being protected. So that documentation is going to be requested. And I think, anybody in here who's been fortunate enough to have a relationship with, the folks that were sitting in their building, right? They are very diligent in their process as well. So, they are getting the companies, I think, ready very early on to be sort of in a position to go to outside investors, outside the city of Pittsburgh. We're going to ask for the same things. Recently, I had a client in San Francisco, awesome founders, they were amazing, and their third founder just unfortunately was not cooperative, right? And that founder did not have a vesting schedule. So I started working with them 3 years after the company was formed, so give context here.
What does that mean to not invest? Like, they just got it up front?
Yeah, they just got it up front on like a napkin deal, right?
Wow.
Which is incredible for me to deal with, right? And so,
yeah, good for him, right?
And so during the sort of separation, settlement talks, trying to get some form of agreement that assigned over the IP and everything like that so that this company could move forward, because they had actually, they were raising. And so they had relatively, I think, seven-figure trying to come in the door so they could take this next step. But we needed to solve this very, obviously, glaring issue. That founder decided to go open up a company that does the exact same thing. And there was not a lot, there's some common law things that we try to do, right? There's some things we can try, but ultimately, like, there's not a lot, especially in the position of, litigation's expensive. So, like, even trying to make those arguments, there's not a whole lot, and that person was relatively within a lot of legal rights because that IP was not protected. They helped develop the IP, and there was no documentation assigning any of the intellectual property for what they developed over to the company, right? There's no proprietary rights agreement. There was no
proprietary rights agreement.
There's no proprietary rights agreement. There was actually
That's amazing. This guy vested. No, yeah.
There was actually no formal stockholder agreement.
Okay.
There was a lot that was not there, right? And I'm requesting these things from them because they came to me in a panic, and none of these things are there.
Wow.
They're like, well, this is what we have. They had like bylaws.
Okay.
They all had restricted stock purchase agreements, right? But the restriction didn't have a vesting schedule in it, so it's not a restricted stock purchase agreement, it's just stock purchase agreement.
Yeah, right.
It's tightly restricted stock purchase agreement, right? And so it was an interesting situation. But once again, like, these were folks early on. They were all very smart. They utilized information that was provided to them by some of the university they went to, some Google, some from some of the resources through like Y Combinator, things like that. Okay. And they were just putting it together, and they trusted each other, they loved each other. Yeah. They thought that there was very little risk, but then you fast forward 3 years later, and there was a lot of risk, and ultimately, it's caused some issues for their development.
It's funny because right now I work at an international company, and actually some of our Portuguese colleagues always are like making fun of the Americans. They're like, yeah, you guys are like so nice to each other, but as soon as things hit the fan, that's when you guys are just like, guns pointed blazing, like just no questions asked, like shoot first thing. And I was like, that's an interesting way of framing it. I never thought about that. But kind of to your point, like when you think West Coast, and some of the businesses here might have multiple operations in multiple states, kind of like, what are the tax implications or insurance implications there that you have to like be careful of?
The state of, New York, California, where else? They're like a different country, and their requirements for insurance and it's horrible. So every time we get a client, they're like, we have an office in New York. Everybody rolls their eyes. So, you know, knowing where your employees are, and, you know, sometimes we have people who are like, ooh, they're from California. Let's look at this other person. So there are different things that you have to do depending on where you are. And even within the state of California, if you are in San Francisco proper, that is a whole different ball of wax versus outside of San Francisco. So there's a lot that needs to be done. You have to make sure you have the right partners that can help walk you through it, because you can get into trouble. And they are big on, you know, Department of Labor is big on, you know, like we just got an email yesterday saying we now have to have our agent number listed in every email in California that we send. And it's for what, you know, but it's just now, it's one of their new rules. So it happens a lot. So there's a lot of different things you have to look at.
When you think about payroll, do you have kind of certain type of tools or vendors that you like right now, or like kind of things that you're like, I don't like this trend of how things are automated? Or
yeah, so payroll is an interesting thing. People either love their payroll system or they hate their payroll system. There's no perfect payroll system out there. So a lot of startups use Gusto because it's really cheap, but they typically, their wheels fall off around 20 employees because it was made for small companies. We work with Rippling and Zenefits. So Zenefits was started by an entrepreneur named Parker Conrad. That whole system, that's an interesting story, so look that one up. And then he went and started Rippling, which is a competitor to Zenefits. And they're great because you can plug all these different things into them. So if you have a cap table, you can plug Carta into it, and you can plug a 401k program into it. It's really nice, and you can onboard your employees. They can pick their benefits in it. It's really easy to do payroll, and they kind of set up the guardrails for you so that you can't go off track too far. You know, which is always an important thing. But so those would be, you know, some of the ones, and we get discounts with them for our clients, and you know, so that's kind of nice. But there's lots of local companies that you can use, bookkeepers that you can use to do your payroll if it's just for a few people. You know, some people use QuickBooks, things like that. But make sure you have somebody who knows how to do it for you.
I would second absolutely everything that you just said there. The one thing that I would add is I could tell you horror stories for people who try to do payroll themselves. Don't do it. It's a trap. Please don't do it. The interesting thing on that front is the owners have personal liability. So if you mess something up, you're on the hook for it in the long run. And payroll is not something that you can just pick up and know all of the ins and outs of it. And Laurie was mentioning there's local taxes, there's your federal, state, and local, depending on where they are. You guys are Jacks and Janes of all trades, but payroll is not one of those trades you want to be a Jack and Jane of. There are people, this is their bread and butter that they do. You would be very interested to know that it's quite inexpensive compared to the time and cost you guys would be incurring. So, if you take any bit of advice when it comes to payroll, don't do it yourself, okay?
Yeah, Gusto was amazing.
Just to add another thing, from state to state, in different jurisdictions, from mindful of is that any jurisdiction has different compliance, requirements, and depending on what your, technology that you're developing is, something you're going to get from, at the very least, investors questions about is those compliance concerns, right? Legal concerns that come with it. Data privacy, I think, is just probably going to pop up in a lot of investor meetings at this point in time. And in 2023, 5 new data privacy laws are going to be enacted in different jurisdictions across the country, and that's just going to kind of continue to proliferate. So that's just another thing to be mindful of, is as you're entering into new jurisdictions, as you're even talking to investors in different jurisdictions, really do a little bit of that sort of research. At the very least, if you have like a product that collects any consumer information on what data privacy laws are in place there, because you're more than likely going to get at least one question about your compliance plan or standards or whatever it may be.
That's a really good point.
Do you see it mainly on a state-by-state level, or like on a federal base, like the?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a federal law, it would save me so much time, and I would love it. But right now, I mean, obviously, we know the political climate in DC, and I think getting federal legislation passed right now is one of the hard. It's always been hard, but it's harder than it really ever has been. And there's countless federal bills that have been drafted. Some have bipartisan support, but nobody can really agree on how to go about regulating, I think, big tech, and that is harming sort of tech startups and everybody in between, because the states are taking it, in their own hands, which is creating a patchwork. And so a lot of the legislation across the country is very similar to each other, which is nice. It's all sort of born out of the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU. Everybody sort of copied some of those data rights and the framework that the GDPR took, and then the California Consumer Privacy Act now kind of became the standard for the United States. Colorado, Virginia, Pennsylvania has a law that is to still be voted on. All of them have very similar features to the California Consumer Privacy Act, which will be the California Privacy Rights Act in 2023. But there's still these just little differences, right? So it just creates a lot more work for companies, and a lot more legal fees in terms of being compliant in all these different places. And so the recommendation is always just find the most stringent standard and live up to it, and adopt that early. If you adopt it early and you sort of design your company with privacy in mind, it'll just save you so much money and heartache down the line.
That's a good one. Just a quick thing, Jane, how are we doing on time? I'm not sure when we want to do Q&A.
10:05, you have 10 more minutes.
Okay, do we want to do Q&A now, or no?
Are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask our panel?
Okay.
First of all, tell them to move to Pittsburgh. It's easier here, right? Why go to California or New York?
California and New York are dead states from an income tax perspective as well, in case you're wondering. It's not a reason to not go to those states, but it's something to be conscious of before you move into those states.
And for
Jersey too.
I don't get anything from the mayor for this. I'm just saying because I love being here.
Pittsburgh's the place to be.
Other thing is,
Grab one of your microphones. Thank you.
the other question is, how about if you outsource some of your, like I do, some of my, back office support, I just outsource this and I don't deal with any of this issues. They take care of it.
Well, so we see a lot of fractional people, so fractional CFOs, we do fractional HR, CMOs. There's a lot of people out there like that you can, utilize instead of hiring a full-time person. And we always say from an HR standpoint, a lot of companies, even larger companies, will say, I'm not going to spend the money on an HR person, that's just an expense. But it really, you can't afford not to have somebody who brings in the right people, trains your people, helps define your culture and maintain the culture. And so, even if you have somebody for a couple hours a week, that can really help save your company some heartache. So we've had a lot of startups where we've had to go in and help change their culture because they went from almost frat house, ping pong tables and beer lunches and things like that, to they hired their first person with some gray hair, and all of a sudden it was like, it wasn't you, Larry, but it was all of a sudden like, holy crap, what do we do? There was this big disconnect. So
Are we saying beer lunches are bad?
No, I'm not, but I'm just saying.
Just checking.
That was the big draw, So, there's anything like that you can outsource. We always say elevate and delegate. So what do you really need to work on in your business? And what are you really good at? And the stuff that you're not, you've got to get somebody else to do it. And for us, the insurance and HR is like the hot potato. As soon as an entrepreneur gets somebody that they hire, they're like, oh, here, you get insurance and HR. So we get to work with a lot of people, and that's not their core competency. And so having, those fractional people that you can outsource things to is fantastic.
It helps me a lot of headache, let me tell you, it saved me a lot.
Yeah. Well, when you think about how much longer it takes you to do some of these things because it's not your core competency,
Exactly.
you know, somebody could do it in an hour and it might take you 5 or 6 hours, and you're not going to do it because you don't want to do it. So it's a big issue.
Great question and also a great point. And Andy is also available for the Q&A session, I will say, as a founder and great mentor to other local startup companies. So, do we have any other questions from the audience?
My name is Thomas Vogt. I'm a German-American. Been here 22 years in Pittsburgh. We founded a Pittsburgh company as an LLC, and I learned as I'm raising money for the investment that the LLC is not very good for raising money. So my question, we have to change, I believe, to C Corp. And from the tax perspective, it's C Corp Delaware. I'm still a Pittsburgh company. How is that all, and what kind of difference in responsibility?
So to build on what Tom was saying, an LLC is a pass-through entity, which means the entity itself is not taxed, but rather the income or loss gets passed out to its owners on what's called a Schedule K-1. Why is that important to an investor? Well, if you have an investor who's investing in 50 different companies, they don't want to wait for you to get your act together and get your tax return done before they can do their tax returns. So the other side of it is having a C corporation. A C corporation is taxed in and of itself, so that there's no requirement for that tax return to be done before the investor can do their tax return. And so it's very common in the startup world that our startups start as an LLC because they think they want to pass out that income and loss to maybe affect their personal tax situation. But at some point, they might want to convert to a C corporation. And there are some strategic opportunities that you can do from a tax perspective if you choose to convert to a C corporation. First of all, consider doing it at the end of the year. Why might you do it at the end of the year? The reason for that is the first portion of the tax year would be an LLC, and then you have a second tax return that is a C corporation that would need to be prepared. So you're splitting your tax year right down the middle. It adds cost for compliance. There's a lot of bookkeeping cutoff that needs to be addressed, and even from an HR perspective, you might need a new EIN, you might have to update your payroll systems. There's more to it than meets the eye. So that's the first thing. The second thing, if you're an LLC, and you've been an LLC for a period of time, getting outside investment that has been generating tax losses that have been passed out to the owners, if you've been deducting those tax losses on your personal tax return, those individuals or entities may have a tax issue at conversion that might not prevent the conversion, but you need to plan ahead to see if there is a tax issue. So those are two major things that you might want to consider if you convert from an LLC to a C corporation. But I have one other thing that's a really big pro, okay? And we'll talk about this for a few moments if that's okay. If you're a C corporation, at some point in the past, the IRS put something in law to incentivize the creation of C corporations, startups specifically. If you meet a certain type of company, a C corporation, if you're doing a certain type of work or service, if you are an individual who owns the stock of the C corporation for 5 years, not 4 years and 11 months, 5 years, and you sell your stock after 5 years, you sell your stock, not your assets, your stock. If you qualify and meet the criteria, each individual can exclude up to $10 million under present law from federal capital gains tax. Now, this might be a reason to consider converting sooner rather than later to start that 5-year clock, okay? You can't predict the future. Everyone's facts and circumstances are different, so if you're looking at this as a reason to convert, you need to at least consider tax advice on that front to see if you even qualify. But I dealt with 3 clients this past year and it was a home run, right? So those unicorns do happen, and if you have proper tax planning, it means a whole lot in the long run. So those are 3 major things. I don't know if I answered all your questions, but those are 3 major items that I've seen come up.
Yeah, I wish I did ours. We were in the same situation.
So I failed accounting 2 times, and I learned more from you sitting here today, and would have done so well if you had been my professor. Honest to God. And as an investor, who does their taxes on October 14th every year because we don't get K-1s in a timely manner.
Oh, yeah. It's a thing.
That's it.
It's a thing.
Yeah. I always say, you know, people who are in accounting and they think, oh, we should get the Kuzneskis as clients. You don't want us.
It's the story of our lives when it comes to that point. But to your point, Laurie, the more proactive you can be from a bookkeeping perspective, from a payroll perspective, from an HR, IP, all of those different pieces feed into, if you have an investor looking at you and you're scrambling to catch up, it's too late. You don't want to have that investor say, wait a minute, give me 2 weeks to get my books and act together. They don't have that time. So if you're scrambling to catch up, it's too late. So proactive as much as you possibly can.
And if you don't have investors, that's a big red flag for an investor. It's, you know, you need to know your numbers. You need to have that foundation in place, or, you know, a smart investor is not going to invest.
They know, they see through it.
Yeah, I mean, so conversion is something that I deal with all the time because I'm the person that people come to when something's messed up, right? So, you know, we convert probably 100 companies a year for this exact purpose, right? And we always make sure that our tax attorneys are involved and they say words that I don't understand, which is great. But no, the one thing that is overlooked all the time in conversions, and the one piece of advice I would give anybody who has an LLC, especially an LLC that's long running, as yours is, so there's been a lot of business that's done and things like that, is you entered into probably a lot of agreements, and then also, you know, you might have folks that are already, you know, members of your company, right, or own some form of equity. So all of your corporate documentation and all of the agreements that you have that are currently in place, they need to be revisited. And so from the corporate documentation side, you know, as an LLC, you have an operating agreement, you know, you have these things, right? Well, all of the rights that are given to members in that operating agreement need to be mirrored in the stockholder agreement when you convert, right? So it's a tedious, very annoying process that I've had to do 100 times this year, where we have to look at that operating agreement and have to see the rights that are given to these members, and then make it into whatever the similar term is for that stockholder agreement, right? And that is a super vital piece, because if you convert and you don't give those members the same rights that they had under the operating agreement, then, you know, they do have cause of action, right, against the company and the company's officers. So that's something to keep in mind. And then in terms of the agreements that you've entered into, so your master services agreements, all those different things, whatever your business is, you need to look at some of the provisions in which termination clause can be triggered by your conversion, potentially. The other piece of it is it's just good practice to notify those companies of the conversion and potentially amend the company's name in an amendment, right? It's typical, they see it all the time, but if you don't notify them of it, it could give an opportunity for an issue to arise, just from a contract law standpoint. So those are just two things I think get overlooked a little bit in the conversion process when a company's been around for a little bit. A lot of conversion that I see is pretty early stage. Company started in January as an LLC, and then like in March they realized, oh, I shouldn't have been an LLC, I should have been a C Corp. You know, they just need to hurry up and flip everything over, and it's a small team. But if you've had a lot of business that's been done, you need to consider those things.
Wait until the end of the year.
Unless an investor's pressuring you.
Actually, yeah. Business first.
Business first.
Taxes
Business
second.
first.
Economics first. If you're going to get an investor,
which is usually,
please give me my money.
it's usually when people come to me, right? It's like
Yes.
investors like, I need you to convert, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
they get a referral to me, and somebody can get it done for them. So
Is there also an issue with if an owner is an LLC, them being considered an employee, and if they get paid by the company, then they have to pay the FICA tax?
Ooh,
I know.
We're getting fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So an LLC owner is a member, and they are considered self-employed. And so all the way up until they convert, they are considered a self-employed individual, and so they're allowed to get paid for the work that they do. But that's called guaranteed payment, and they're responsible for both the employer and the employee's portion of the Social Security and Medicare tax. When you convert, that owner goes on to payroll. where they become a W-2 employee, and there's no longer an income tax exposure to them quarterly, where they had to remit their taxes quarterly for their guaranteed payment, because W-2 is withholding it and remitting it when you become a C corporation. That is the pro of being a C corporation, because you don't have to worry about your pay being subject to tax and remitting your quarterly estimated payments. So it makes your life a whole lot easier to be a C corporation.
And it makes it harder to get insurance too when you're that founder as an LLC, because you're not an employee. And so you can't be on a group health insurance plan.
So, and some people who are looking for a mortgage or something like that tend to like being a W-2 employee. Larry.
So I started an S-Corp back in the early 2000s to protect my family as I was doing consulting on the side. My tax accountant this year said the government is going to make sure that even though you're the individual owner and the pass-through has been through the owner, that you also register as an employee. I said, I'm the only employee. Said they're really going to go after this year because of unemployment, etc. Have you heard that as well? They also said that Pennsylvania is the hardest company. I initially registered in Ohio, came to Pennsylvania to start registration. I think I have 15 email addresses for Department of Labor, this, that, whatever. What a nightmare.
So I would agree, there's a lot to go. There are some benefits to being an S corporation. Generally speaking though, if you're looking for institutional investment, you do not want to be an S corporation just because C corporations or other entities cannot invest in an S corporation. They're more restricted. But for a consulting entity, you do have to be an employee if you're one of the owners. And the IRS requires you not only to pay yourself, but pay yourself a reasonable salary. What's the definition of reasonable, you ask? I'm glad you asked.
About $1 billion a year.
$1 billion a year. Well, think about it. If you make $100,000 and you're the only employee, you'd be hard-pressed to pay yourself $20,000. Chances are you're going to have to pay yourself more. And there are some pros to paying yourself less if you're an S corporation. We can talk about that if that's a question of yours after.
But you are seeing that
I am.
I've got to become an employee of my S corp.
There is movement for self-employed individuals to kind of cut that out, on the other hand, because you are the only person. But as an S corporation owner, you are an employee and you are required to be on payroll.
Thank you.
Great question. We have any other questions from the audience? Okay.
I have one more question. So let's say we started about you have employees, real employees, and you have, let's say, contractors with 1099 employees. So now you're developing technology, and that's IP. So how you're handling this that is really yours, and the contractor was paid, and all what you're delivering is for the company and the owner of the company.
Yeah, I mean, that's provisions in the contract, right? So then this goes back to a point I think I made earlier. You know, and if I'm understanding your question correctly, real quick, let me reiterate. Contractors are helping you deliver work product to the end, to like an end client, is what you're saying?
And they have the idea too, so but you pay them.
Yes, yeah, all right, so you know, depending on the sophistication of the company that you hire as who's going to be the independent contractor, there will be, they should have a paper, right, that they kind of always hand out to the companies they work with, and there should be a work product provision in that agreement, right? That should, and this is something that sometimes it does not. Actually, we see this relatively a lot with foreign development service companies. They don't have this, or the wording they have actually gives them the ability to utilize it elsewhere. But you know, it should assign everything over to you because you're paying for it, right? And then have other general confidentiality provisions and things like that. However, sometimes it is silent on the matter, which is concerning. or it gives them the ability to be able to utilize parts of that IP or the IP as a whole in other projects or for other clients.
Only the special situation what we have in Pittsburgh, we have good universities. We make 1099 contracts, although it's university stuff. How is this? Yeah, so
this, are you talking a little bit more like about a teaming agreement?
Yes, so you have it, but you have not as an employee. So they are still paid by the university, but have a, let's say, in contract with you. So now the university said, oh, wait a minute. First is the employee here, and all what they are doing is ours.
Yeah. Okay. So that is an interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting situation. So basically, one, maybe don't probably deal with people who are employed by universities, but no. Beyond that, so in a contract, right?
The microphone.
You're gonna have in the contract representations and warranties, right? And one of those representations is going to be this contractor representing to you that they have the ability to enter into this contract, right? Now, if their employment contract with the university basically does not allow them to enter into these separate side contracts, and you know, a few other things, right, like that. So it has covenants in their employment agreement, right, restrictive covenants. Then basically you have the ability in which your contract is, they're in breach of contract in your contract, right? So your contract is void. Now that you're there, you have to make arguments, right? And so the argument would be, you know, the contract is void. Anything developed up to that point is owned by you, and hopefully the university's general counsel or outside counsel would see the situation, understand it. They would kind of just not want to muddy their hands with fighting with an entrepreneur in the local ecosystem. However, if they were to, you have a really, I think, strong basis in court to make those arguments. But it does become very messy, and you just kind of hope that it can all be solved via an agreement. Verbal agreement, you know, with the university, and they don't kind of come after your IP. But that is a very interesting situation, and you know, the contractor would be in the wrong there. Like, just people coming to me with situations like that. That is my entire life.
Contract A to contract B to contract B, yeah.
Every day I get a phone call with somebody telling me all these things, and all the facts are bad. That was good facts. We have a contract in this facts.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is why we're having this conversation. You know what, Larry? I have 2 more questions left, and I'm going to actually take a little from what everyone submitted for the event tonight. Okay. So thank you all for, first of all, submitting the events. But Laurie, everyone wants to know the exact cost of what insurance will be. I have a feeling you can't quote that right
here. Yeah, I didn't have his law professor, but it depends. And so if you are budgeting for like employee benefits for your company, a lot of times what we suggest is like 25% of your payroll. So, and it might be a little bit more if your people are paid less, and it might be a little bit less if your people are paid more. But that's the Medicare, the 7.65 FICA match that you have to do. That would be medical insurance, dental, vision, maybe life and disability insurance. On the commercial side, it really depends. You know, if you have a board of directors, you're going to need directors and officers insurance. If you are looking at maybe, oh, I'm going to bring this person on my board, and a good board member is going to say you need to have D&O insurance, it's expensive. It's anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000 for $1 million worth of coverage. So, you know, it might be wise to keep them as an advisor and, you know, have some sort of agreement that way so that you don't have to buy that insurance out of the chute. If you have a product, and this is where we sometimes get those phone calls from entrepreneurs that are like, I just got canceled. I've been paying $300 a year for my general liability insurance, and when I tried, because I got it online, and when I tried to up my coverage to $10 million, they called me and said, what's going on? And you know, I told them I was a software company, but when they figured out I was a software company for an autonomous vehicle, that became an issue. So the price of your insurance is directly correlated to the risk that your product has. So, you know, if you're paying $300 and you're creating an autonomous vehicle, probably not going to cover you. So it's really important that you get somebody that understands what you do. And we work with a lot of crazy life science companies. I mean, you know, we got a guy growing livers out of lymph nodes, and I'm like, this is amazing, but boy, it's hard to insure it. So, you know, so you really want to make sure there's, you know, general liability. If you're driving your car, you need to have the auto insurance for your business, not just your personal insurance. You know, the product liability, employment practices liability insurance is really important once you hire employees. So if you fire somebody, they can sue you for anything. Even though Pennsylvania is an at-will state, and you can fire somebody for any reason, they can sue you and you have to defend yourself. And so that covers the cost of hiring an attorney to defend you. So there's a lot of different things that you have to look at. Cyber liability insurance is really important. You know, it's not if you get hacked, it's when you get hacked. So, you know, if you collect any kind of data, that is really important to have that. And we always say from an insurance side, the freest thing you can do, we always say it's free 99 to do this, is to set up good business practices. So having the right advisors in place, having the right contracts in place, having the right policies and procedures and processes in place in your business, that's free to do, and that is the most important thing. So we always say if you're going to go in front of a jury, you can say, I did all of these things to avoid this happening, and it still happened. That's puts you in a better stead than, you know, if you haven't done those things.
So it's probably going to make all of you guys cringe, but for me, the only time I knew I needed insurance was when something broke. And then you're like, I should probably have that. That's good. But probably not best practice, right? But
it is no, it's not best. You can't get it after it's broken, you know, so it's, you don't get life insurance after you're dead. So it's just a rule of thumb.
Thank you, and we are really close on time, but I want to close with this last question for all of you, and what is a common risk or pitfall on the horizon for small businesses that you would want our founders and entrepreneurs to think about and to look out for?
are there any like policy changes?
One thing that makes me crazy whenever I hear, and I think we've all kind of mentioned this at some point, when you've already done something and then you're asking for advice. So the issue becomes is now I just have to help you deal with the situation you're in rather than planning to make whatever situation it was better. So my piece of advice is to be as proactive as you possibly can, because if you've already got that letter of intent to purchase you guys, or if you've already gotten a call from someone who's suing you, or like all of those different pieces, even from a tax perspective, you're going through due diligence and they're saying, why haven't you filed an income tax return in California? You've had employees there for 5 years. It's a little bit too late. So proactive, being on the front end as best you can.
I've seen this, not even just from an insurance side, but from an investor side. We've seen a lot of companies go under recently. Some of them have been clients, some of them have been investments that we've made. And one thing that I noticed is that a lot of those founders or entrepreneurs did not reach out and ask for help. They did not. I was telling people last night, some founders, you got to use your resources. And so resources like your accountant, your attorney, your investors, your advisors. You can't keep, the mistakes or issues hidden and then they blow up. I always say the universe whispers, and when you don't listen, it starts to scream. And That's, that's what happens. So don't be afraid to reach out to ask questions, ask for help, say, hey, is there a better way to do this? We get calls from founders all the time. They're like, I have to fire my whole team. And we're like, whoa, 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 wait a second. Let's talk about what the issues are. And, we've helped them solve those issues, and they didn't have to fire anybody. So, don't be afraid to ask those questions. There's a lot of people in this ecosystem who will help you come up with maybe a better solution.
At least they were proactive and called you before they did the firing.
Well, that's it. They wanted to know how to do it. well, yeah. So that is, something that's important. But definitely use those resources.
Like I should have sent a meme to all my friends, right?
Depends what the meme is. Yeah, so I mean, from a legal side, I already kind of talked about the regulatory kind of landscape changing around privacy, which is really going to, I think, touch most tech companies in 2022, moving into 2023. So just being aware of those things, and I think the piece of advice I'll add here will just build on what they've said. Be proactive, ask questions. And the last part will be like, remember that you drive the relationship with your service providers, right? And so, I mean, this is what I'm about to say is like generally just going to like open the curtain, right? Like from like a law firm's standpoint, right now, like tech startups and emerging technologies, you guys are a huge, huge opportunity for law firms and for other sort of service providers, right? And so I've been around for a while, and I've seen the cycles of people just coming and going and trying to exploit this ecosystem, and the ecosystems across the country, right? I get emails every day from the DC Tech weekend, a law firm who sponsored got the whole email list, and then has been sending their next level startup lab to every single person on that server, even if they aren't somebody who asked for it, right? And you read the fine print of what this is, and it's like 30 free hours, but then you go to our normal rates, right? Like things like that. Like, don't be afraid to ask, what exactly are you charging me? How much is this going to cost? What are the terms of our relationship? Because like I tell people this every day. So if I work at an AmLaw 200 law firm, and I'm able to tell every founder I work with, hey, this will cost this much. Hey, I don't know how much this will cost, but it'll be between this, and we'll set caps. And I will call you when we approach this number. If I'm able to do that, and with the overhead and the system that I work in, then most of the law firms that you all are engaging with or dealing with are doing the same thing. And I tell every founder that I work with, go get a second opinion. Like if you, like here are the numbers, here's how much this will cost, here's my strategy, please go talk to other lawyers. Get the second opinion, meet other people, like find who works for you, because I think a lot of times founders especially don't it's almost like they don't ask, or they're afraid to ask, or they don't understand that they drive the relationship. Like I work for my clients. It's like at the end of the day, they're my boss. That's who I answer to. So don't be afraid to be the driver of that relationship and take ownership over those relationships with your service providers.
I was like, for me, my last thing, almost kind of flipping instead of like what's the greatest risk, kind of almost like what's the next opportunity is we're in a really unique era where things are changing so fast on multiple fronts, like consumer behavior, compliance, like regulatory needs and stuff. So I think as a startup to be keenly aware of the why now for whatever you're doing, because that's always changing. I think there's a lot of opportunity now. There's consumer sentiment has changed. We're buying things in a different way. We're buying from different people. Regulatory things are different, like climate tech, right, is a really great opportunity now because there's new policies that enable different business models that couldn't do before, and other things like that. So that's for me, like, as you guys kind of operate in this new world, it's actually a really interesting opportunity despite the echoes of recessions coming. But last thing I'll leave you guys with.
Thank you all so much for your time today, but also for what you're doing for the Pittsburgh community. We appreciate the support, the expertise, and everything that you all